Okay, Synod, so we come to the first item of business for the day, which is item 17, the cost of applying for citizenship. Before I do that, I have to announce the outcome of the Open Synod Group quiz, in which we raised £300 for the Red Cross and their work with refugees and victims of terror. So can I thank the Open Synod Group for organising that? And if you've never been, it's a great occasion and you get to learn lots of useless information that you'll never need again. But please do think about going next year. Well done, Open Synod Group. So for this item, Synod, you will need a GS 2074A and GS 2074B. And I now call upon Ben Franks from Birmingham to move this item. He has up to 10 minutes.
Ben Franks, Birmingham, 250. Thank you, Chair. I stand to speak to the motion on the cost of applying for citizenship on behalf of Birmingham Diocesan Synod. This motion focuses on what we believe to be an unfair basis for charges involved, in addition to the personal cost, in applying for citizenship of the UK. Firstly, it's quite important to explore what citizenship is. In a defining sense, citizenship is a legal status, meaning a person has a right to live in a state, and that state cannot deport them or refuse them entry. This status is conferred at birth, or in some countries, obtained through naturalisation or citizenship. In liberal democratic states, such as the UK, citizenship also brings with it a right to vote, to welfare, education, or healthcare. Acquiring citizenship is seen as principally related to migrants, as with this motion. However, it is vital to recognise that citizenship isn't only about migrants, but is more generally about individuals' association with the state, society, and the communities of which they are part. Recent political activity has emphasised the relationship between citizenship and civic responsibility, such as engagement in civil society, voting, and jury service being some examples. In addition, as well as legal status, citizenship can also indicate a personal feeling of identity and social relationship of responsibility and reciprocity. Sometimes these are described in words like loyalty, values, belonging, duty, or shared cultural heritage. This also points to the complex and often assumed relationship between citizenship and belonging to the nation. The British debate on migration and citizenship is set within a context of many decades of policies and reviews. Recent governments have promoted the concept of active citizenship as an attempt to transform citizens from passive recipients of public services to actively engaged participants in public life. In the 2000s, citizenship education was introduced as a statutory subject in secondary schools, and wider proposals were put forward for language and citizenship courses and tests for applicants to British citizenship. This took place against the background of disturbances and tensions, which gave rise to concerns about community cohesion and a lack of shared values. The Church has done a lot of work in this area, especially through parishes who have been enabled through resources by projects of the Presence and Engagement Programme. As a Church, we have again recommitted this week by passing the motion moved by the Archbishop of York on Friday, calling for the government to prioritise cohesion of the nation and its communities, and affirming the work done by our churches, particularly in supporting the poor and the vulnerable. The process for those of foreign nationality applying for citizenship in the UK emphasises that citizenship is a privilege, not a right. Citizenship is only granted after a lengthy process, which amongst much form filling, the main form running to over 70 pages, can you believe, includes applicants maintaining their bank accounts permanently in credit over a period of some years, being able to prove that they can communicate in the language of the country, and completing a test on life in the UK. And this is no mean feat in itself, even for UK citizens of birth. Example tests are available online, and please do, in your own time, have a go at these. I did fail one on my first attempt. Applicants wait many years to apply for the privilege of citizenship and are eager to finalise their status and to attend a citizenship ceremony. This motion was moved initially by Central Birmingham Deanery, of which I am proud to be part. Clergy colleagues within Central Birmingham and beyond are regularly asked to complete references for those who qualify and are applying for citizenship. Our churches, along with many across the whole country, provide a warm welcome of Christian hospitality and inclusion to new arrivals to the country and support them in the long journey of settling in the UK. We endeavour to provide pastoral, practical and spiritual care that is appropriate and sensitive to people's physical and spiritual journey. And in return, we find our parishes grow in membership and discipleship through this practical outliving of the gospel. I know that this is a pattern repeated throughout the country. Our congregations want to do the right thing as guided by their faith, through both the support I have already mentioned and indeed in bringing this motion before Synod. The fees required for citizenship are currently £1,282 for each adult and £973 for each child. If applicants make a mistake on any of the forms, the fees, apart from £80 of the adult application, which is the element included for a citizenship ceremony, is forfeited, and they must begin the process again. To avoid this, they may pay an additional fee to a registrar from the local authority who will check and forward their forms. The fees are increased on an annual basis using delegated legislation and therefore aren't brought before Parliament for comment or debate. The fees required in this country exceed the costs of processing an application, and indeed they far exceed those of other developed nations. Some examples can be found in the helpful note from the Secretary-General and Birmingham Diocese's background paper. Many of those who are eligible to apply for citizenship are working in the low-pay sectors of our economy due to their uncertain status, making well-paid employment more difficult. Many people save over years to pay for their applications. There are also those whose difficult situation leads them to go into long-term, high-interest debt from unscrupulous lenders to do so. Money advice and signposting to responsible lenders being a key area in which our churches assist those who are struggling. It is important to be aware that a requirement of applying for citizenship is to already have leave to remain in the UK. So the prohibitive cost has no function in managing migration. It simply leaves people, particularly people on low or median incomes, here, but not able to feel a full belonging. Those who do not apply for citizenship, but maintain leave to remain, are caught in a status limbo. They have a right to reside, but are not citizens. As non-citizens, they cannot vote, have more limited travel options, and cannot take up their full civic responsibilities, though by this stage they are earning and paying tax. This creates a subclass. It risks undoing the work we do in promoting cohesion, when many hard-working, well-integrated migrants contributing to the economy and their communities are locked out of becoming British citizens because the application fee is so prohibitively high, and it has spiralled in recent years. This is not a motion about immigration, and that was our intention. This is about the financial and to some extent personal cost of applying for citizenship. We are convinced that citizenship should be about loyalty, not about wealth. I therefore beg to move the motion, standing in the name of Birmingham Diocesan Synod.
Thank you very much, Ben. This item is now open for debate. I'd like to call Carolyn Johnson for a maiden speech, followed by Nicholas LeBay.
Chair Carolyn Johnson, Blackburn 255. I strongly wish to support all 4 paragraphs of the motion, but to particularly encourage the investigation and lobbying of the cost to children and young people around the prohibitive costs for them of applying to be British citizens. The government, through our Lord Spiritual, should be asked to debate and address the level of citizenship fees for children to make them fair, efficient, affordable and accountable. As a family law barrister specialising in childcare cases, I regularly encounter children and young people who have no legal immigration status. Many of these children and young people were born in the UK or have lived here for most of their lives. Often the visibility of their lack of status coincides with their transition to adulthood. For families I represent, it's usually a crisis situation, like domestic abuse, relationship breakdown, an accident, deterioration of their health, or loss of a job that precipitates action regarding their status. In the intervening period, these children and young people will usually have integrated fully into society, built up support networks, settled in our education system, and know no other life and speak no other language than English. They have no other home and belong in the UK. But for many of these children and young people, the lack of permanent immigration status can have a significant negative impact on their life and future in the UK. In adolescence, many have to put their lives on hold, unable to plan for their futures and contribute fully to the society that is their home. The cost of citizenship applications has been mentioned. The fee for children, which was amended on the 6th of April 2017, is £973, of which £386 constitute the cost of administration and £587 is profit to the Home Office. Thus, there is a large discrepancy between the unit cost and the fee charge, with no consideration of the impact on children, their best interests, or the government's statutory duty to promote their well-being. In many of these cases, what is being charged is a pre-existing entitlement under the British Nationality Act 1981, where the Home Office has not been asked to grant, but is merely required to register the child's citizenship. Making a profit, let alone one of £690 from a child's entitlement to be registered as a British citizen, is arguably immoral and should be challenged by the Church and Parliament. The government's own guidance states that becoming a British citizen is a significant life event. Apart from allowing a child to apply for a citizen passport, it gives them the opportunity to participate more fully in the life of their local community as they grow up. Assistance by parishes to support children and families and young people who struggle with the cost of citizenship should be encouraged because their communities will benefit from the full economic and social contribution of newly enfranchised and motivated young citizens in their midst. I also urge the Archbishop's Council to investigate the issue of a fee waiver policy for these children and young people who cannot afford by any means the cost of a citizenship application. This would provide consistency, fairness, and allow children to apply without penalty or discrimination. My husband is a DL in Lancashire and conducts regular citizenship ceremonies. He's always impressed by the preparation, commitment, enthusiasm understanding and pride that the people exhibit when taking their oath of allegiance. Synod, we should encourage and help our children and young people in making that commitment to our country and help them provide the means to become enfranchised and motivated as proud young British citizens. I beg to support the motion.
Synod, I should have said there's a 5-minute speech limit at the moment. After Nicholas Lebay, Kat Aldred for a maiden speech.
Nicholas Lebay, Southwark 414. Chair, thank you for calling me. I warmly welcome this motion and I'll vote for it. I've heard this statement many times. Citizenship is not a right, but a privilege. I agree, but I think that privilege should not come at a cost so high that families and individuals end up in debt, often feeling frustrated, stressed, and helpless. As an immigrant who came into this country and I've been through the process, I know how difficult it is to be able to get there. It is complex, expensive, as we heard from the presentation. A small mistake can result in your application being refused. And when that happens, you forfeit your application fee. I had that experience 3 years ago when I put in an application for my 2-year-old son, paying nearly £1,000, waiting months. I had a letter from the Home Office saying that my son's application has been refused. I was shocked. I couldn't believe it because I've made an application based on advice received from the Home Office in Solihull. We made an attempt to plead for a refund. It didn't work. Not even the intervention from my local MP was able to change or persuade them to reconsider my son's case. In the end, we had to make a new application. And here I'm so grateful to the bishop at the time, a bishop in Bradford, who is now the Bishop of Leeds. It was his support and the diocese that helped us to make a new application. But then I started to think to myself, how can it be that a system designed to help people to integrate into this society makes it so difficult and hard for them? For many people, I was fortunate to have the support from the diocese, but for many people, they go around borrowing money, taking high interest loan, and ended up in more debt. This isn't fair. What these people want is to be able to call this, to be able to have that full entitlement, to be able to settle in this country that they call home. I've talked to a lot of people in my diocese, in the place that I serve, in Thamesmead, among the West African community. I've heard stories of people saying to me that I don't want to apply anymore. I've tried several times. They refuse me because of a small mistake. Some said I won't do it again because I don't have the money. And they don't want to spend a lot of money they have on this process because they think that it's just not fair. In many cases, these people work so hard, but they end little, and all they want is to be able to finalize their stay in this country. In my own story, I entered this country on a 1-year missionary visa. When that visa expired, I began the lengthy and expensive process, extending my visas multiple times. In the process, I went to the Home Office in Glasgow, Birmingham, and Sheffield before acquiring my indefinite leave to remain. When I decided to apply for my citizenship, I'd already spent £3,000 extending my visa. So when I was asked to pay another £1,000 for my naturalization, I asked myself, why? Why? But I had no choice. I paid. It was difficult to raise the money. When I hear what people go through and what I've seen through this process, I hear 2 words: injustice and exploitation. And that is what people go through when they try to go through this process to finalize their stay. This is not right. When I read passages from the Bible, like Exodus 22:21, don't mistreat or oppress an immigrant. Leviticus 19:33-34, do not take advantage of foreigners who live among your land. Treat them like native born and love them. The system doesn't treat us that way. Synod, we are Christians, and as Anglicans, we believe in justice. And as a matter of fact, one of the marks of mission says that we are to act to transform unjust systems. The motion before us gives us the chance to do exactly that. Let us speak up for those who have no voice. Becoming a naturalized citizen for me was like a blessing, But for so many, the path to obtaining this blessing has become difficult and, if you like, a burden. Let us support this motion and through this help remove the burden for many immigrants in this country. Thank you.
After Cat Aldred, Sir Tony Baldry.
Cat Aldred, Derby, 295. Chair, thank you for calling me. This is a very welcome motion for me personally, but much more importantly, I think this is exactly the sort of action the Church can and should be taking to help change unjust structures in our society. I've lived in the UK for 17 years with leave to remain. For 14 of those years, I've been eligible to apply for citizenship. However, I've never done so for a series of reasons, cost certainly being one. For me personally, the cost is not insignificant, and it's factored into my decision-making. Up until now, I've made the choice not to apply for citizenship. I've been very fortunate, and other than not having a vote, which I regret, I have found that my lack of citizenship has not hindered my ability to engage with my community and society at large. But very clearly, for many of my fellow non-citizens, this is not the case. As we've already heard some stories and the case studies that were in the paper, the cost of the application for citizenship is virtually insurmountable and is then standing in the way of people's full integration and participation in society. This motion is about so much more than the practicality, though, of how a person will be able to finance an application for citizenship. There's something more important in the message this action would send about the principle of welcome, about how we as Christians view and treat other people. Very shamefully, in my country of origin, there's been far too much talk about building a physical wall to keep people out. Very sadly, it appears that the cost of applying for citizenship in the UK serves as a similar barrier to full entry to society. The motion before us is about the cost of the citizenship application. Thus, the people who are impacted are primarily those who have already gone through the various steps so that they know that they meet the requirements. They've ticked all the boxes and they've overcome obstacles. Following all of that, the barrier of cost then stands in their way as one last, potentially unscalable wall. Our current political climate includes a lot of language about those who belong and those who do not, about holding people at arm's length, seeing them as the other, a nameless, faceless mass. One of the most important questions for us is what the Church's voice should be in that dialogue. It's vital that we help give voice to the voiceless and show that they are real human beings with names and faces and stories of the obstacles they have already overcome. We can help identify and discourage the barriers that stand in their way, and we can use our influence to help ensure justice, particularly for those in some of the most difficult of circumstances. This is a place where we as the Church, as Christians, can be instrumental in change being made so that where once there was a wall, we can open a door and extend a hand in welcome. I urge you to support this motion.
After Sir Tony Baldry, Sarah Schofield.
Tony Baldry, 373 Oxford. Firstly, I think we should send a copy of the transcript of this debate to the Chair and members of the Commons Home Affairs Select Committee and ask the Select Committee to undertake a committee inquiry into this whole topic. I think actually, arguably, one should be able to argue that the cost of citizenship should actually be reduced but made as easy as possible for anyone who has been here for over 5 years for these reasons. Governments of all persuasions for quite a while now have dealt with refugee and asylum seeker applications by granting this concept of indefinite leave to remain. So if you're a man who has indefinite leave to remain married to a woman who has indefinite leave to remain, you both retain your original citizenship, as does your children. So what we now have, as Carolyn Johnson very clearly explained, a very large number of people in every constituency who live here, who are part of our communities, but effectively are stateless, and their children become even more stateless. And that cannot be in the best interests of public policy. And it must be good public policy to try and ensure that those who have lived in the United Kingdom for at least 5 years and who've made this their home have the opportunity of being integrated and becoming full members of our community and actually have a vote. I mean, I just wonder how, if people have a vote, you go and knock on their doors. If they don't have a vote, they become invisible. And so I think there are very good grounds for arguing that citizenship for those who've been here for over 5 years should be as cost-effective as possible, because actually we want to ensure that the next generation feel fully integrated and part of our society. And can I just also personally testify as a Deputy Lieutenant in Oxfordshire that all those who come to citizenship ceremonies do so with enormous pride, and they want to be citizens of the United Kingdom and subjects of the Crown. So it's in all of our interests that everyone becomes integrated into our community as quickly as possible and do not have barriers thrown in their way.
After Sarah Schofield, the Bishop of Birmingham.
Sarah Schofield, Lichfield 147. Thank you, Chair, for calling me. I'm very grateful to our neighbours in the Diocese of Birmingham for this motion, which I fully support. I became aware of this issue when I commented during a particularly cold winter to a woman in my congregation as to how ill she'd been looking for a few months. She told me that she needed to find £7,000 from her part-time minimum wage job to complete the citizenship process for her family. Unwilling to approach a loan shark, people make savings where they can, which on such a low income isn't cutting back on luxuries. Subsequently, in my other existence as a research student, I came aware of a postdoctoral student in a subject we need, engineering. Theology is possibly out for debate, but we need engineers. Who was looking for a first post specifically outside of the UK because she hoped to start a new family and she hoped to buy a house, and she didn't want to have to factor in the cost of buying her way into membership of the country she lived in. We certainly make financial profits on these fees, but as others have said and will no doubt say, we risk losing much. At a time when we are trying to encourage a sense of belonging, commonality and citizenship, why place obstacles in the way of people who have lived here for years, paid much into the nation already, both in tax but also in kind through community membership? They have demonstrated belonging. As I thought about cohesion and community well-being and all these buzzwords that I come across a lot as a Near Neighbours trustee and being involved in a couple of Near Neighbours projects, I became aware of the certain irony that a number of the volunteers in my Near Neighbours project, trying to build up common life and communality, cannot afford to buy their way into the nation that they seek to build.
After the Bishop of Birmingham, Andrew Williams.
Urquhart 007. Thank you for your... I just briefly want to pick up the clause B, which also mentions the Lord spiritual, and endorse everything that Sir Tony Baldry's just said about the quality of the contributions that we've had, which make excellent evidence and arguments for making the case in Parliament. Can I also say that in the other way of operating, there are all-party parliamentary groups which tend to detail and push issues of this kind, and one of those is the all-party parliamentary group on social integration, for which the Bishop of Oxford is a member. And if you Google that, you will find the principles that are being undergirding what we're saying today are already in writing, and the responsibility of that group, and that's a good channel for pursuing the issue that we're, I hope, going to support today. Sir Tony also mentioned the importance of regarding people who want to stay here and are committed to stay here and have a right to stay here to feel at home. We might be reminded today of the Rabbi Sachs book, The Home We Build Together, and moving from being in a mere hotel to being in a comfortable country house at a distance to becoming a full neighbour. And I think what we're hearing today is giving proper evidence for parliamentary decisions to change the arrangements as they now stand.
Synod, could I ask if anyone is standing who wishes to speak against the motion? Okay, well, after Andrew Williams, well, I'll tell you what we'll do after Andrew Williams. Thank you.
Andrew Williams, Coventry 294. Mr. Chairman, thank you for calling me to make my maiden speech on this item. And I'd like to thank Ben for bringing this motion forward today, and I'm happy to support him. While it is right there should be a charge for those applying for citizenship, I think this should directly relate to the actual costs. And I think we're right to go back to the government and say, hang on, let's make the costs actually reflect what is reality in going through this process and not some arbitrary high figure. We should also be clear that this is not a debate about immigration or migration. These people are already here in Britain. They already speak English, or possibly in some cases Welsh or Scots Gaelic. But these people are already part of their communities. They're here. This is their adopted country, and they want to become citizens of their adopted country. And why shouldn't they want that? Being British is great, I'm sure we all agree. And we should be a welcoming country and want more people to come and join us in this wonderful thing of being British. I'm happy to support this motion and urge the whole Synod to do so.
Yes. I think I might like to hear just one more speaker, and then I would welcome that. The Bishop of Europe.
Robert Innes, 17, Bishop in Europe. I want to draw Synod's attention to Table 2, which shows comparative costs of citizenship applications in different countries. Many of the members of my diocese, much as they regard citizenship of Britain as great, are in fact applying for citizenship in the countries in which they live in the EU. And the experience is a tough one. Even for highly educated people, the process of filling in all the paperwork, the language tests, learning the local culture, it's tough. And you're in a vulnerable position when you're going for interviews, facing panels, completing the forms, getting things translated. It's a difficult process. To charge people disproportionate fees for doing that simply staggers me. In the country in which I live, in Belgium, it costs under €200 to make these applications. I can't believe that we've allowed the Home Office to charge disproportionate fees for people in vulnerable positions who want to do something which is basically good, which is to integrate into the country in which they live. I warmly support this motion. I'm staggered that we've allowed the Home Office to get us into this position, and I urgently would hope that those in influence in Parliament can take steps very rapidly to put this right. I commend this motion to you.
Thank you. Yes, that has my consent. Does that have the consent of Synod? Please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. Thank you. So I'm going to... Can we wait till we actually get to the vote yet? I'm going to ask Ben to come and respond to the debate. He has up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, everyone, for the debate this morning. I was very pleased to see the amount of support we've got. We heard some unique experiences as well. We heard from Carolyn, who'd got experience in family law and had that one-on-one relationship with people who were applying, and had mentioned her concerns over the fees for children, especially with the experiences children have. They integrate quite well into society, and for them not to feel full citizens, that could actually, cause them lasting damage. We heard from Nicholas Lebby, who told his personal story of applying for citizenship with his child. Yes, it was a real injustice issue that happened, especially with the forfeiting of the fees for making small mistakes on the forms. And he also told us how the support of the local church was vital, and how something that is sold as a privilege, should it really come at such high financial cost? And shouldn't it be more of a commitment? We heard from Kat Aldred, who said, although we're not building a physical barrier here, as in other places, but we are still building a barrier. But the church is here and is called to be a voice for the voiceless, and that's something we need to remember. So Tony Baldry, obviously you have experience in this area, and you did mention about public policy should possibly be reviewed there, and it was a wonderful suggestion that a transcript of the contributions we've had today were sent to the Commons Select Committee. I'm sure they would find that probably difficult reading, but is that not what people are here for? And thank you to Sarah Schofield as well, and who brought across some of the hardships that were encountered by some of those people who were saving for citizenship, those people who didn't want to go to the unscrupulous lenders, but there again just had to make sacrifices, quite heavy sacrifices, to save over a long period of time for that family to become citizens. And we do risk losing people who are assets to our country. And maybe the buy-in to our nation shouldn't be a financial one. It should be that buy-in of loyalty. Thank you to the Bishop of Birmingham as well, especially in his role as convener of the Lord's Spiritual. His support will be vital, and his work in taking this forward, working out with his colleagues how this can be approached in the Upper House of Parliament. Thank you to Andrew as well, that the charges, reminding us the charges should relate to the actual cost of processing the application. And we have a history of being a welcoming nation. Maybe we need to review, if we're showing that through our policy. And thank you to the Bishop in Europe for the unique position you are in and experience of people going through the process in other countries. And maybe we need to explore what the value proposition is of our country, and really the government could use that when it works further on policy. And also bring you back to the hymn we sung this morning as well. The kingdom of God is justice and joy. Justice, that one key issue, I think runs as a thread through this, as well as it relates to the mark of mission, to challenge unjust structures of society. So I hope that you will agree that this motion does relate to that, and it is an outworking of our faith in a very practical sense. But we need to bring that to the attention of the whole country and to our government to act on our behalf. Thank you.
So, members of Synod, I am going to order a count of the whole Synod on item 17. This is a counted vote of the whole Synod. Those in favour should press 1, those against should press 2, and those who wish to record an abstention should press 3.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. Well, what's happened there? The voting period has ended.
Those voting in favour, 310. Those voting against, none. Recorded abstentions, none. That motion was carried. And I'd like to thank Ben and the Birmingham Diocese Synod for bringing this important motion to our attention. That concludes item 17, and we'll now pass on to the next item of business.
We now come to items 18, followed by item 19, which are both connected with the work of the Elections Review Group. And the paper for item 18 is GS 2075, with a number of proposals to do with including online elections and composition of the House of Laity. For this item, I'm going to invite the chair of the Business Committee, Canon Boys, to move the motion at item 18, that the Synod take note of the report, and then it will be open for debate on the floor. There are no amendments appropriate for this item or that are in order for this item. And so, Sue, would you please come and speak to the motion at item 18. The speech limit is up to 10 minutes.
Thank you. Boys, Oxford 186. The sock drawer of General Synod. After the election of every new synod, the Business Committee establishes an elections review group. And the task of the group could be described as sorting out the black socks, you know, those odd ones that scatter around your sock drawer, of all the different issues that get raised in connection with the elections. Some of those issues are very technical, but ably advised by the legal office, the Elections Review Group sorts its way through them and reports back to the Business Committee. And this is our opportunity to share that report with you. Whilst the last two ERGs have had their fair share of socks, they have also, as you will have seen from the report, had some major issues to tackle. In the last quinquennium, these were the electorate for the House of Laity, which hasn't been quite laid to rest yet, and the reform of the university's special constituency. In November 2013, the Synod agreed to move towards the introduction of online elections in time for the elections in 2020. And this has formed a major and important part of the work for the current Elections Review Group. They have looked carefully into the possibilities and believe that, subject to some issues of detail, online elections should be introduced. The Business Committee has endorsed their recommendation, and the diocese are fully supportive of the proposal to develop with Electoral Reform Services a web platform to conduct the whole electoral process from nomination through to count. Electoral Reform Services provide our current ESTV software, and using a provider such as them gives us some assurance about the security of the online system. ERS run hundreds of shareholder elections, employee ballots, union ballots and so forth, and the system is tried and tested and, as far as anything is these days, known to be secure. We don't underestimate the challenge of getting the necessary legislation in place in time for proper testing in selected dioceses before the starting pistol is fired for the 2020 elections, but we are confident that it's possible. The ERG has recommended regional training for diocesan teams in order to ensure that the new system can have a good and confident start, and the Business Committee is particularly keen to ensure that this happens. Members will see from the financial memorandum, the 7th notice paper, the green one, how much we anticipate dioceses will save once online elections are in place. However, we know that not everyone has an email address nor access to the internet, so we shall have to ensure that it's possible to participate in elections in the good old pen and paper manner. However, we intend online elections to be the default position from 2020. So those who do not have access to the internet or simply do not wish to participate online will need to opt out of the online system in order to participate. The cost per election will be elector will be affected by a number of factors. These include the total number of electors and the number of electors who choose to opt out of the online system. However, the per capita cost of elections will certainly fall, and I'd really want to encourage dioceses in their own interest to rise to the challenge and to be as persuasive, and also to find ways of being facilitative for people to participate in these elections online. I've majored on this because I'm not sure how fruitful a discussion we could have about other issues that are lurking in the sock drawer part of the report. But as ever, I'm willing and delighted to be surprised if you have other issues to raise. Most importantly, I want to express my gratitude and my admiration for their tenacity to Clive Scowen, who has chaired the group, and the other members of the ERG, Joyce Jones and Anne Foreman, for whom, as members of the Business Committee, service could be regarded as something as an occupational hazard, and to Philip French and Geoffrey Harbord, both of whom allowed themselves to be appointed to the Electoral Review Group, and as ever to the staff team for their support in preparing this report. I commend it to you and trust that you will be kind enough to take note.
The floor is now open for debate. Prudence Daly, followed by the gentleman there. There's a speech limit of up to 5 minutes at the moment.
Prudence Daly, 376 Oxford. There are just a couple of points that I wanted to make. The first is that I'm very reassured to hear that that the needs of those who aren't able to use online methods have been taken into account. I think we sometimes forget just how many older people there are who either don't use the internet at all or who struggle with using things that they're not familiar with. I mean, you know, more times than I want to remember, I've had to talk people through how to respond to a doodle poll because it's not obvious to them when they get an email what they have to do with it. And these aren't people who are stupid, they're just old and they're not used to these things. You know, they haven't grown up with them, and I think that's very important, and particularly if we were to change the electorate, we could have more older and potentially digitally excluded people within that, so that could become a bigger issue. But I would plead that whatever the method is for people to opt out of digital elections and into paper-based elections, that should be made as easy as possible, and goes without saying that it shouldn't require doing anything online in order to opt out. So that was my first point. Now, my second point was perhaps on one of the socks that's been left in the bottom of the drawer, and that was about the question of diocesan officials lobbying on behalf of certain candidates. Now, I did hear, and obviously I'm not going to name the individual, but I did hear a case where a candidate had, sensible reasons for believing that their diocesan bishop had been privately briefing against them. And so that raises the question of diocesan officials and indeed senior staff briefing against candidates as well as in favour of them. And whether or not that situation happens as it was recounted to me, I think it would be helpful if the wording could be changed so that it didn't just refer to people being, briefing in favour or appearing to support particular candidates, but could be couched more generally in terms of neutrality. Thank you.
Followed by you, Madam.
David Lamming, 399 St Edward's Street in Ipswich. Mr Chairman, members of Synod, I hope we take note of this report. This is the first take note debate that we will have had since the report of the bishops on GS 2055. But what I want to highlight is an important issue which is not included in this report, but can be considered by the revision committee who are looking at the church representation, ecumenical relations and ministers measure. And that is the current imbalance of representation between the two provinces of York and Canterbury. Let me just give you the figures. At present, the church representation rules require that the seats in the House of Laity be distributed as near as possible in the proportions 70 to Canterbury, 30% to York. Now, what that means in practice is that there is a skew in favour of the province of York. On the basis of the figures that we used for the 2015 election, the position is follows, and these are the extremes. The Diocese of Carlisle, with 17,674 electoral roll members, have 4 members of the House of Laity of this Synod. The Diocese of St Edward's in Ipswich, which I represent, with 20,053 electoral roll members in 2015, have 3 members of the House of Laity. That means that in the Diocese of Carlisle, 1 member of this Synod represents 4,441 electoral roll members. In Suffolk, it is 1 to 6,684. Now, it seems to me that that is an unfair imbalance. It's one which can be corrected. It's a matter which is being dealt with, I suggest, and should be dealt with by the Revision Committee looking at the church representation measure, because that measure, as you know from the debate in February, involves a complete rewrite of the church representation rules. Now, as it stands, Clause 44, or rather Rule 44.4a in the schedule to the draft measure repeats the 70-30 split. But members of Synod, I suggest that that should be looked at again and brought back in due course to this Synod when the Revision Committee report, and that imbalance should be corrected so that there is even representation across the whole of England. Thank you.
After this speech, gentleman there, and that for now, that's fine. And after this speech, I'm going to see if the speech limit might be reduced to 3 minutes.
Carolyn Graham, Guildford 317. Thank you for calling me. It won't take 5 minutes. I'm going to thank the Elections Review Group for their work, and I support their report. I just wanted to draw someone's attention to one issue on online hustings, which is where offensive material has appeared and been published as part of the online hustings. I'm going to ask the group to look again at how this sort of issue can be dealt with. Now, I accept that it's clearly not appropriate to censor candidates' responses, and it's important that electors know what the candidates think about things. But it's also important that the church is a place where people know they're going to feel safe and accepted. And not only that people inside the church know that, but people outside the church browsing websites don't get the contrary impression. So the difference between traditional and online hustings is that with traditional hustings, people are unlikely to stumble across them. And if they do stumble across them and hear something that upsets them, there's likely to be someone there who can support them. Whereas on online hustings, any member of the public can read them, whether they're browsing the diocesan website or just using a search engine, putting in relevant words and stumbling on the material. Now, I don't have any preferences to online or traditional hustings. I'm quite happy for online hustings to take place. We had both in our diocese last time, and they're both well supported. However, there is an issue with how material is handled. And I don't think a general disclaimer that is really sufficient. Now, I want to give you an example of something that happened in our diocese at the last election, and I'm going to use the words Sarah has given me her permission, because she wasn't an elector, she is a Christian, and she stumbled across something that upset her. Now, I'm not going to tell you about the material, but I'll give you her email, or part of her email to the diocese, where she asked why the diocese wasn't moderating this material. And she said, "I just wanted to let you know that I found the response very hurtful. There's a clear inference that LGBTI Christians like myself pose a danger to children. I think the candidate could express his support for traditional teachings without unsubstantiated words that are so damaging. I only returned to church 2 or 3 years ago, as I always feared not being safeguarded from extreme accusations. Hence, I do not have the thick skin that many people have developed from facing such words. But I do not think average people like myself should have to." Now, the diocese responded kindly and explained how they moderated questions but not answers. Sarah was still upset. She wrote to me. She said she was extremely upset that the diocese has no safeguards for people against insinuations that they are a risk to children. Surely the diocese had some responsibility when providing a platform to people who are expressing unsubstantiated extreme views. I wish this was an isolated incident, but it was words similar to this said to me personally about 15 years ago, insinuating that I was a risk to children and that I was an abomination, which led to me being driven out of the church. Now, clearly, in a democratic process, people must answer questions as they wish within the bounds of legality. I'm not challenging that. And electors, as I've said, must know their views. But this material is published on the diocesan website, where it can hurt people and drive away vulnerable people. So I'm going to ask the group to see if there's any other options they can think of that might prevent this. I mean, some suggestions might involve emailing responses directly to the electors or putting this material on a password-protected section of the website. You may have other ideas. But I suggest that we can't simply put this material on the diocesan website where anyone can stumble across it. I contacted Sarah a few days ago asking if I could refer to her emails, and she gave permission. And she added, and I think that her words are the best, "In simple terms, I still feel vulnerable and anxious in church. These feelings are only made worse when you know the church chooses to have no safeguards for people like me, preferring to protect those who can be so horrible by simple inaction." Now, I think the church has gone some way to allay her fears, but I think it's important that we do take responsibility for material published on our websites. I'd ask the group to look again at how this can be dealt with. Thank you.
Speech limit is now 3 minutes, and after you, sir, then the prolocutor.
Peter Kay, 206 St Albans. One of the great glories of the church is its diversity. Every Sunday it is a miracle as I look out presiding at the Eucharist, the diversity of people who come to the rail who would not be bought by any other means but by the love of Christ in different ways, different situations. Having come from corporate life, it is also a source of incredible amazement to me how many of the greatest and most committed and most wonderful saints in God's church don't have computers, don't have email accounts, don't really know how that all works. And I would just suggest that I'm thinking perhaps in my own deanery, a glorious, wonderful deanery. Deanery synods are really exciting in our neck of the woods, which may not be the case for everybody, but I'm thinking to myself, online elections, how would that work? I would just urge Business Committee and the review group not to underestimate the challenge of this. I know that it has to be balanced. I know that it also has to be balanced by the needs of poor younger people who may be extremely bewildered by the idea of having to go to a post office, buy a stamp and go to that strange red metal thing and put a letter in. I know that there are wider issues here, but as I say, thinking about my own context, thinking about actually the wide diversity of the Church of England up and down the country, not to underestimate the impact and what may be necessary in those electoral changes, just to make sure that everybody is included in that. Thank you.
Prolocutor followed by Tim Hind. After that, I might be interested in a motion for closure.
Thank you, Chair. Simon Butler, Southwark 219. I think one of the dangers of having a process which requires the review of an election every 5 years is that there's a danger of Groundhog Day coming round. I remember Mr. Scowen, I think it was, in the last quinquennium, making the speech that is now on the lips of Mr. Lamming. So I would urge Mr. Lamming to be careful. He's doing quite well in the shirt stakes at the moment, but he may find himself on the platform in 5 years' time, responding to the very same point that he has just made. I chaired the legislative process that followed from the reported election review group in the last quinquennium. And it is worth reminding members that the very point that Mr. Lamming was made then and responded to. I think also, as we are about to look at the electorate of the House of Laity, we also are going to be asking the same question again. Now, I note in the report that it does say that there are some members of Synod who consider the way that was dealt with unsatisfactory, although I can't recall anyone actually saying that in the middle of it. But it does raise the question when we do these processes, how we keep the corporate memory, so we don't come back in 5 years' time and hear Mr. Lamming's speech on the lips of the next person who arrives and spots this discrepancy. And I wonder whether it will be useful in producing these reports to have some form of summary of what was considered and decided on in the previous quinquennium, so we don't get to this situation and have the same argument and come what I would imagine will be to the same conclusion as we did then.
Tim Hind, followed by the lady here.
Tim Hind, 247 Bath and Wells. I'm very grateful to the Prolocutor mentioning the sartorial elegance of the chair of the group that produced this. I noticed on social media that somebody made a mistake when describing the dress of somebody in Synod. They used the word satirical. I leave that word for you. I think it's just a wonderful word that's just been created this week. In paragraph 6, it talks about the House of Laity elections and the way in which we're going to have a single transferable vote referendum on the way in which we might perform those elections. And I'm very pleased to see the word advisory so that we don't get into the problems that we had in June last year. But the point I want to make is that although we are about to think about the way in which the process is done, however the process is done, it needs to be backed up by good support. And it really doesn't matter whether we go for universal suffrage on the one side for the House of Laity elections, or by some form of electoral college, whether it be deanery synod, a separate deanery synod being presented, a diocesan synod, or members of the PCC. What is most important is that people are actually informed. And therefore, the plea that I would make alongside any changes to the way in which we change the process is that dioceses across the country make sure that when it comes to the time for election, there is good, solid support for those people who are going to make those decisions as to who is the elected representatives for their diocese, and make sure that the candidates that are going to be putting themselves forward have ample opportunity to make sure that their case is made honestly and justly through that process.
Point of order. Thank you very much. I'm minded to hear this speech and perhaps one more, and then I'd be grateful for that to be repeated.
Hannah Gravel, Derby 297. Thank you so much for bringing forward this report and for looking at online elections. I've been waiting for this for years, and if we could persuade the government to do the same with the general election, I think the disengaged 18 to 24-year-olds would have a massive increase in vote. We wouldn't have this disparaging thing. What is fantastic in the 2015 elections to the Synod, there was a massive increase in young people. You've heard them as full voting members, not on the youth council. I know I was once on the youth council. I want to say again, I'm definitely not anymore, and I'm actually too old to be on it. But full voting members are now here in the Synod. There's loads of us now, and unfortunately, young is sometimes classed as 50 years and under, which has increased on the Synod, which is fantastic. If you want more 18 to 30-year-olds, or 18 to 40-year-olds, or even 18 to 50-year-olds on this Synod, there are a number of things you can do. We made a move in February to change the February and November Synods to go over a Saturday. That's very helpful to me. I've taken annual leave for today. I only took 1 day annual leave. I wasn't here Friday because of that, because I do want a holiday with my husband this year. But moving things online will help engage those 18 plus year olds up to whatever age we're going to call old. Nobody's just old, by the way. Everyone is welcome, and they just have a different understanding. And to be fair, there are people way older than me that understand how technology works way more than I do. What I want to get across is that this is the right move to help engage poor young people who have no idea what a letterbox is. And it will engage us so much more. There needs to be provision for people who don't want to use the internet or can't use the internet for whatever reason. You need to consider as well how people who are blind might vote as well, because online is not necessarily the best way. It may be the best way. We don't know. It's a way of working around it, but I really hope that we can endorse and get moving things online hustings, online voting. It's the way forward, and I really commend this to you. Thank you.
Mr. Mason, and then I'd be interested in hearing the mind of the Synod on a motion for closure.
John Mason, Chester 281. I just have a brief comment also related to the move to online, referring to in paragraph 26 of the report. It talks about election addresses, and there was a submission to the idea that they should only be made available online. And I suspect what was driving that was something I have observed, is that in some of the General Synod elections a couple of quinquennia ago, there were some people who had the resources to be able to fund the posting of their own addresses to their whole constituency. And that seemed to me to provide an unfair advantage to people who had the resources against those who did not. Now, the group says that they feel that this problem will fall away should we move to online a system. However, as we just heard, those who are temporarily challenged and others who may find it difficult to go online, this will mean that there will still be an element of paper to the elections. And I wondered if the group shouldn't be a little bit more positive about stating that there will be some way of addressing the problem of still having people submit things in paper because they have the privilege of their own resources. Thank you.
Point of order. I think I'd like to test the mind of Synod of that. There's a motion for closure. Those in favour? Those against? That's clearly carried. Boys, to reply, please, up to 5 minutes.
I'll never make jokes about sock drawers again. Prudence, thank you for your comments, and thank you particularly for the kind of facilitation you have offered to other people that I think I was trying to hint in my initial speech. Deaneries, like those of Mr. Kay, will be offering to people who need help to vote online. Perhaps you could have a voting coffee evening where someone brings a computer and everyone can enjoy themselves voting. But there is start a new culture. But we really do hope that dioceses and deaneries will encourage. That doesn't mean that there is any intention at all, and I really want to reassure you about this most strongly. There is no intention to force people who have a preference and desire to vote in the original paper mean. There's no desire to stop that, and every effort will be made to make sure that that happens. But it is also an opportunity to encourage others. Prudence, you also raised the issue of diocesan officials lobbying on behalf of candidates. It's always sad when we hear on the floor of Synod, as we did from Carolyn Graham, of things that we all know shouldn't happen. We can revise the guidelines. As you all know, the responsibility for the conduct of elections lies with the diocese and not with this Synod. However, there are guidelines regularly issued, and those are revised and looked at with each quinquennium, and that has been noted. And I would say to both of you that the guidelines will be looked at in the light of your comments. Simon, as ever, you were speaking the notes that I had been making for myself to write in reply. We worked together on the last round of elections review, and I would just say, perhaps in response to you, because you've done the responding to everyone else, that there is, of course, a view that an issue doesn't go away because people feel that it's still important, and it's important that Synod hears it, but maybe also listens to the wisdom that says that we spent a lot of time unpicking those numbers and the ideas behind them at the end of the last quinquennium. John Mason, if you vote by post, then you will get your election addresses by post. And again, the issues around hustings and election material is really in the hands of dioceses. Thank you, Hannah. It is wonderful to have you as full voting members of this Synod and the people who are becoming the community memory, so that in years to come you will be able to unpack the sock drawers of election review and keep everybody else online. Thank you.
So the motion under item 18 is that the Synod do take note of this report. Those in favour? Those against? That is clearly carried. That ends item 18. We move on to item 19. This is a presentation from the Elections Review Group under Standing Order 107. The presentation outlined the options for the electorate of the Synod's House of Laity, with a view to an informal ballot being conducted as the preferred option. Those voting papers are on your seats and will be collected by means of a box on the information desk as you go, so don't leave them lying around. I'm going to ask Mr. Clive Scowen and his team to make a presentation. I expect they'll explain this, but we're going to have a presentation briefly on each of the 5 options on the voting paper, and I understand that there will be a comment for and a comment against on each of the options. Mr. Scowen.
Thank you, Chairman. Scowen, London 358. Can I just say that our team isn't quite complete, so if the last member of the team would like to join us on the platform, that would be really helpful. Elections Review Group in the last quinquennium, as we've heard, conducted a review of the electorate for the House of Laity and explored the pros and cons of the current system and 4 potential options for change. The Business Committee recommended to Synod that one of those alternatives be adopted, but the options themselves were never presented and explained to Synod. And the debate on the motion to give effect to the recommendation was begun in York and then adjourned, resumed 4 months later in London. And in the end, Synod did not accept that recommendation, but after a rather confused and fractured debate. Many felt that justice had not been done to the Elections Review Group's work and that the options had not received proper synodical consideration. So this is unfinished business in a way from the last quinquennium, which this quinquennium's Elections Review Group felt should be given its quietus. So this morning, I and other members of the group, plus Debbie McIsaac, will be presenting those pros and cons, including the status quo, and they're all referred to in GS MISC 1164, which I'm sure you have all read from cover to cover. After that, there will be an opportunity for questions with which we will attempt to engage and answer. And finally, as the Chairman has said, the ballot paper that you've been given, we ask you to perhaps wait to fill that in until you've heard all the presentation and the questions, to rank in order of preference the different systems. And if there is a consensus for change, then the Business Committee will be asking the Archbishop's Council to bring forward the necessary changes. So we begin with the current system, and Anne Foreman will present the arguments in favour and Philip French arguments against.
Thank you. Anne Foreman, Exeter 308. How scary is this? My first time up here. Now, people who know me will know that I'm not someone who is opposed to change. You can't have a background in youth work or any other sort of campaigning and not be an advocate for change. So why am I suggesting we keep to the system that we have? Well, if you've read, as I'm sure you have, GS MISC 1164, then you'll have noted that the paragraph outlining the reasons against lay members of deanery synods is much, much longer than that outlining the reasons for. But I want to say, stay with this system, but most important, I want to improve it. In particular, to increase the level of the turnout, which in our diocese was somewhere around 50%. And I'm optimistic that it can be done. And the reason for my optimism is, well, I think the rather tired old tale about the difficulty in filling vacancies on deanery synods has had its day. Things have changed since Bridge. It was sort of 20 years ago, after all. And like Peter Kay, if you've noticed if you've been to deanery synods lately, you'll know that they're changing. Renewal and reform is reaching them. They're becoming more open, more user-friendly. Of course, there's still room for improvement, but no one who participated, as I did, in the recent National Deaneries Conference could be left in any doubt that deaneries have the needs of the parishes firmly to the fore. And indeed, one of the motions here today over this synod started life in the parish, went to the deanery before coming to the diocese, and then here. And as for the link with General Synod, well, I think we have to take some responsibility for ensuring that deanery synods are kept well informed through our reporting back. Reporting in ways that generate interest, ways that will ensure a higher turnout at the next election, which is not too far away. So stick with this system that we have. Don't burden our diocesan secretaries with the time and cost involved in implementing a new system, but work to continue to improve communication between deanery, diocese and General Synod so that interest is generated, the electors are well informed and reports from General Synod are welcomed. Thank you.
Philip French, Rochester 388. Bridge was 20 years ago. The synodical government measure was nearly 50, the measure under which this synod was established. And it's that which defines the system of election via deanery synods to the General Synod for the laity. It is not something I suggest that we would invent now. Now, I know if dear Archimandrite Ephraim were still with us, he would tell me that 50 years, or 48 years as it is a very, very short time in the councils of the Church. But I would argue that it is high time for change. Deanery synods vary hugely in their commitment, their efficiency, and their degree of engagement with the wider councils of the Church. To make the electorate for the General Synod a side product of appointing deanery synod members, often the last people to be appointed in an annual general meeting when you've run out of other jobs that appear to be more interesting, seems to me fundamentally flawed. It was said of Christopher Wren that if you wanted to see his monument, you should stand in St. Paul's and look around you. If you want to see the monument of the present method of electing the House of Laity, look around you. We are predominantly white, middle-aged, middle class. Yes, the diversity is improving, but it could improve much more with a different electorate than members of the Deanery Synod. Thank you.
Almost forgot what I was doing. This is the case for an especially elected electoral college, which was first proposed by Lord Bridge in his 1995 review of synodical government. And I think it's an idea whose time has come. The APCM would elect people as electors for diocesan and general synod elections in proportion to the size of their electoral rolls, and in accordance with a national scale which would ensure fairness between large and small churches. Bridge suggested one elector for every 50 on a roll or part thereof, reckoning that at that level the cost would be roughly equal to that of the current system. However, with electronic voting, a considerably higher number of voters could be accommodated at little or no extra cost. So I would suggest one elector for every 10 on the roll might be the right level and give a much higher degree of granularity between different sizes of churches and much wider range of participation as well in the process. Those electors would serve for 3 years, but would not be ex officio members of any other body, although the qualification for being an elector would be the same as that for standing for the PCC or Deanery Synod, and no doubt in many places there would be a lot of overlap. However, parishes would have the option to elect a third of them each year, as many currently do with their PCCs. So what are the advantages of this system? Firstly, it's demonstrably fair. A direct proportion to electoral roll membership across the country would be ensured. Secondly, every voter will have the right to... start that sentence again. Every voter will have been elected to that role. And we won't have this current system where you have members of diocesan synods or previous General Synod members being ex officio voters. Thirdly, those elected will be active members of their churches, but not necessarily committee or synodical people. Fourthly, because it doesn't carry with it membership of anything else, a much wider range of people are likely to offer themselves. Busy lay leaders who don't have time to serve on deanery synods, or maybe even on their PCC, but who exercise significant ministries in the church or are called to roles of leadership in their workplaces or some other sphere outside the church. And also young people and black and minority ethnic people, indeed lots of people who are repelled by committee culture or the prospect of going to deanery synod, but nonetheless have a legitimate right to expect to be represented in the synodical life of the church. And similarly, because electors would not be ex officio on PCC or deanery synods, it enables fair representation without PCCs or deanery synods being swamped by large numbers of deanery synod members, which fair representation of large churches currently necessitates. So those are the reasons I suggest that this is an idea whose time has come.
Geoffrey Harboard, Sheffield 216. Well, Synod and the Church as a whole is currently making progress with the simplification agenda of the renewal and reform process. And whilst it may be indeed very attractive to envisage people elected by the annual parochial church meeting with the sole task of electing the House of Laity, I want to suggest that we may here be choosing a bit of complexity and not simplification. The creation of an electoral college by every APCM would add an additional level to the synodical government process, a level which would moreover have no necessary connection with other levels, that is the deanery and diocesan synods. It might be expected that those serving on deanery and diocesan synods by that very fact would have some fair acquaintance with issues of moment at General Synod and in the Church generally. Well, this may, but may very often not necessarily be the case with those elected from the APCM. Well, my experience over years as a parish priest, I think, may well resonate with that of others, in that it can be very difficult to persuade people to take on any offices in the church at all. And in trying to get people to become electors for this one purpose, without any other accompanying duties or further participation in synodical process, might well lead to a situation where those who put themselves forward and are elected will be those people interested, however mildly, in the synodical process. And who would they be? Well, surely those who are or who have been the deanery synod reps. So we could often have a situation where a new level of complexity has been created to achieve what we already have under the present situation. Hardly, I would suggest, simplification.
Good morning. I'm Deborah Ball, a member for the Diocese of Salisbury 405. And I'm here to suggest a few of the reasons why, if a change is needed to the electorate for the House of Laity of the General Synod, the best option is to enfranchise the elected members of PCCs. That body, of course, includes church wardens, secretaries, treasurers, and deanery synod representatives who are themselves elected, and therefore carry forward a representative mandate. It enfranchises a large number of active lay leaders. After all, those willing to serve on a PCC demonstrate an ongoing commitment to the Church through this service. Many have a range of responsibilities and are involved in many aspects of church life. Both as individuals and in a representative capacity, They are interested in and impacted by what happens here. And actually, they seem to know quite a lot about reform and renewal. And they certainly know at least as much as we do about thy kingdom come, and have taken it up with great alacrity. I don't think it's fair to say that I was a church warden for a long time, are not interested in wider church affairs. Indeed, if the electorate became the elected members of the PCCs, then it would forge a direct link between parishes and the General Synod, which might be a very good thing indeed. They're certainly not single-issue people. Can you actually imagine anybody becoming a member of a PCC just to become an elector to the General Synod? There is, however, a remote but distinct possibility to promote a particular position were we to have a separate electorate for General Synod elections. I think that PCC members become quite adept at listening to the congregation and caring about the church and its place in their communities. Members of PCCs are and represent the gospel in context, and we say a lot about wanting to contextualize the gospel. Thank you.
Thank you. Anne Foreman, Exeter 308. And I'm here to suggest that we don't go for this option. I think the option for PCC members is one that will be complicated to administer. It might not consist of the most appropriate people, and it could be even less representative than the status quo. And I wonder how good the communication is in your diocese between the diocesan office and the PCC secretaries. Because if an electoral college consisting of elected members of PCCs is opted for, then the communication will have to be very good indeed. The register of lay electors will need to be very accurate and up to date. And what are the PCC members themselves? The commitment to be on your PCC is considerable, and by its very nature, that commitment is parochial. Their focus is serving their church and community, and deanery synod or diocesan synod may not be on their radar. So how equipped will they be to fulfil the purpose of General Synod, which was helpfully set out, if you need a reminder, in the question 30 on Friday evening, to pass measures, to legislate by canon, to regulate relations with other churches, to make provisions for matters relating to doctrine and worship, to consider any other matters of religious or public interest. And I'm not saying for a moment that PCC members are not capable of addressing any of those issues or may very well be interested in them. I'm sure most of us here serve on our PCCs. It's just that PCC members who are committed enough, in addition to their PCC membership, to serve on a deanery or diocesan synod are far more likely to know the candidates who are standing. They're more likely to have an interest in wider church affairs and more likely to be representative of the diocese as a whole. But another disadvantage is that parishes with small electoral rolls would have a disproportionately high number of electors, and this could be addressed if you had some sort of weighting based on electoral roll size. But designing and delivering that is not, I suggest, a prospect that would fill diocesan secretaries with delight. So I say again, please don't go for this option. It will be complicated to administer. It might not consist of the most appropriate people, and it might be even less representative than the status quo. Thank you.
Harboard Sheffield 216. I've been asked to give some reasons for the election to a House of Laity by members of Diocesan Synod. Well, when a solicitor appears before me in the magistrate's court and says the famous words, "My client instructs me to say," it is a fair indication that the advocate left to themselves would not say anything of the kind and is only doing their advocacy on sufferance or for the money. I'm almost tempted to say, the Elections Review Group instructs me to say that there is a case to be put forward for the election of the House of Laity by lay members of diocesan synods, although this proposition received no support from the previous Elections Review Group or the Business Committee. Let the reader understand. However, there are things to say here. Rather more than all the other suggested electorates for the House of Laity, we can perhaps say that the lay members of diocesan synods are likely, by their interest and participation at that level of synodical process, to have a very good grasp of issues facing the Church and relevant to the elections to the House of Laity. Moreover, it is likely, again, rather more than any of the other suggested electorates, that they will know the candidates, who very probably will have already served on diocesan synod, and therefore they will not be relying solely on the candidates' electoral addresses. It is true that the lay members of diocesan synods would be a smaller electorate than that produced by the other suggested methods. But there are some advantages to this. A smaller electorate means that the elections would be cheaper and easier to administer, and moreover, it is pretty much very well defined as to who diocesan synod members are. And whilst it is impossible on any of the suggested electoral methods to have a 100% accurate list of electors, it's probably the case that the list of diocesan synod members is less inaccurate than any of the others. Well, we could then say that this method pursues a simplification agenda by creating administratively simpler and cheaper elections with an electorate probably more engaged with and aware of the issues confronting the Church than any of the others. Or so my client instructs me to say.
Joyce Jones, Leeds 137. Well, I've been instructed to give the case against diocesan synod members, but perhaps I can do that with a little more conviction than perhaps Geoffrey could. I wonder how many lay members of the Church of England know who the diocesan synod members are. You probably know them, as you're ex officio members with them, but to most people in the parishes, they're quite remote. In my own deanery, there are 3 lay members and 17 parish churches, so very few will have a diocesan synod member in their local church. On the other hand, all these churches have deanery synod members, so everyone is likely to know a deanery synod member. And the deanery synod members are, of course, likely to know them as well. Deanery synod members are likely to represent and be aware of a much wider range of opinion in the church than diocesan synod members, and therefore in electing members of the General Synod are able to vote for people who represent that range. If diocesan synod members were to be the electors for General Synod, there will be 2 steps removed from the ordinary person in the pew, rather than 1 step as deanery synod members are. If we're aiming to make synod more representative of the church as a whole and to enable people to engage in it more, this would be a backward step. People would have no sense that they were represented, and it will be even more difficult to get people to engage with what is happening on synod than it is at the moment. I would therefore suggest that this is not a good basis for the electorate for the House of Laity.
Last one, we're nearly done. Philip French, Rochester 388. I'll say this carefully, for fear of unfortunate reporting. One woman's sock drawer is another man's cabinet of delights. and let us... But let us name some other things clearly. Thank you, Gavin. You're taking my time. We do already have genuinely universal suffrage in the Church of England. We use it to elect church wardens, holders of an office at least as important to the health of church and nation as is membership of the General Synod. That's not actually being suggested for the laity elections to General Synod. We're talking instead about members of church parochial electoral rolls, some 2% of our population, around 1 million people, less dauntingly, around 25,000 per diocese. There's a simple, compelling legitimacy to this method. It would be fair, and it would be seen to be fair, rather than relying on any form of indirect election. It would connect the General Synod to the whole Church, opening up opportunity to mobile young people, not already in deanery or diocesan structures, and it would encourage a more diverse membership. Since the Bridge Commission reported 20 years ago, the digital revolution has transformed the practicality of managing both electoral rolls and elections online. So the purported difficulties, both of candidates making themselves known and their views known to the electorate, and of maintaining accurate rolls, are easily overstated. The availability of diocesan websites, social media, and a mobile phone in most people's pockets, and yes, I do take the point that some people will need other methods. We need to be aware of digital exclusion. Just makes the publicity very easy indeed. And if the electoral roll system is broken, then it's broken for all of the methods we might think about because it underpins them all. If it's broken, let's make it visible and let's fix it. I dare say Adrian in our digital department would relish the challenge of an online electoral roll system, which would give PCC secretaries the backup of someone in the diocesan office. So let's fix that. One church, one faith, one Lord. One person, one vote.
There are, to my mind, three serious objections to the superficially attractive idea of universal suffrage. First, it would open the electorate to people who never attend church and play no part in its life. Because all that's required to be on an electoral roll of a parish is to be baptised, to live in the parish, to be over 16, and to declare oneself to be a member of the Church of England. There's no requirement to be a regular or even occasional worshipper, and no requirement for any involvement in church life. If confining the electorate to diocesan synod members sets the commitment bar too high, I suggest that this approach sets it far too low. Surely those who vote for the Church's governing body should actively participate in the life of the Church. Secondly, it would be very open to abuse and manipulation by pressure groups who could, on a particular issue, try to pack electoral rolls with local people who have an interest in that issue, but no interest at all in the Church and her well-being. Thirdly, for this to work would require much more rigorous record-keeping than many parishes can currently manage. Postal voting for such an electorate would be prohibitively expensive, and so email addresses would be required to be collected for every electoral roll member, and they'd then have to be held centrally in dioceses. It must be questionable whether the current system of volunteer electoral roll officers is adequate for this purpose, since many parishes would struggle to find anyone willing to discharge that considerably enlarged role. So 3 reasons I suggest why universal suffrage, despite its obvious attractions, is not the right way to go. So that concludes our presentation, and Chair, I imagine you'll be asking for some questions.
Now, under Standing Order 107, paragraph 3, there's an opportunity for questions. But I must remind the Synod that this is not an opportunity for showing your workings or anxieties or enthusiasms in public, simply an opportunity to ask questions for clarification to enable you to accept the invitation to vote on the papers in a few moments when this session is completed. So would anyone like to ask a question? Yes, followed by you. I'll take one or two at once and then ask for a response. Take these two.
Adrian Greenwood, Southwark, 411. I just want to get some idea of what's going to happen next. As David Laming has already mentioned, there is this comprehensive review of the church representation rules going through the process. Is the plan to make whatever changes we're going to make or not, is it the plan to use that as the vehicle to go forward? That's my question. Thank you.
If you wish to ask a question, please stand so that I can see.
Tim Barker, 236 Channel Islands. Given that we don't have parochial church councils, that's one option that's ruled out in the Channel Islands. But did the group consider whether church wardens might be an appropriate electorate? And if so, why are they not on the list? Thank you.
Take one more, then ask for a response to these first three. Tim Hind.
Tim Hind, 247 Bath and Wells. Thinking about universal suffrage and the way that might be implemented, should that be the choice, am I right in thinking that the electoral roll officers have a duty to ensure that those people who do not qualify for continued presence on the electoral roll are to be removed periodically during the period of the electoral roll's performance?
Thank you. Could we have a response from the team, please?
I think those three are for me. What happens next? Well, if today's advisory referendum, as it was put, shows a desire for any particular form of change, the Business Committee will ask the Archbishop's Council to bring forward proposals. Now, it could be that the process on the I forget what the measure's called, but including the electoral roll, the new church representation rules, will be able to consider that. Now, if you studied the proposed church representation rules carefully, as I'm sure everyone has, there is actually a provision in there for these sorts of matters to be dealt with by rules made by General Synod, which are not part of the church rep rules. So if the new church rep rules go through as is currently proposed, there will be the opportunity for Synod to vary the electorate for the House of Laity without making a change to the church representation rules themselves, simply by a rule made under those rules. I hope that's clear. So that actually is a simpler form of proceeding. It goes with simplification and doesn't require the full procedure to amend those rules. What we've put to you today are the options that were reported on in the last quinquennium by the last elections review group. I don't think, I'm fairly confident that they did not consider church wardens. They certainly didn't report on it. The option was mentioned in the debate in the last quinquennium, but we felt that our task really was to enable the process that had been begun in the last quinquennium to be brought to fruition. I have to say I can see a number of objections to having church wardens as the sole electorate. For a start, there's no proportionality between sizes of churches, and again, the people are church wardens for an enormous variety of reasons, and they may not be representative of their parishes in all respects. That may be because of the very particular skills that they have, or the particular amount of time that they have, that they are church wardens rather than because of their representativeness. So, to my mind, it's not a good option. It certainly wasn't one that was reported on before. Yes, as I understand it, there is a duty, an enduring duty for electoral roll officers to remove from the role people who are no longer qualified because they have moved away or died or asked to be removed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kay. And would you like, yes, and then this lady here, and then you, sir.
Yes, I'm intrigued, Peter Kay, 206 St Albans. As a rural vicar, I'm intrigued by the idea of PCC's membership, but a little bit concerned thinking about the way that local church polity has an impact, not least thinking that in terms of my PCC members, I have 25 members. However, my colleague in the next benefice down the road has a joint PCC which has only perhaps a dozen members, but of course we have the same sort of responsibilities as well. And so I'm wondering whether any consideration has been given to what may be proportionality between those different types of local church governance.
Chairman, thank you for allowing me to speak. The three representatives, I'm sorry, my name is Sarah Tupling, one of the three deaf Anglicans together. The three of us observed the House of Laity meeting in the evening yesterday, and on observing that, we thought once actually we couldn't be involved, of course, but actually historically deaf Anglicans together have never had the right to vote. And thirdly, I think what was interesting, and this is actually my question, do you think there will be an opportunity or a place to consider how we as deaf Anglicans together could participate in the Electoral of the House of Laity? Is that a possibility for future? Thank you.
Jason Roach, London 166. As we were discussing the arguments for and against Electoral College, it sounded as if the argument against was that it was more complex. My question is, as we're deciding, if we're thinking about whether something is more complex or more just, which one do we put first?
Thank you, Mr. Scone. Ready to answer? Debbie's going to answer.
The question relating to church polity is indeed a very good one, and it is one of the difficulties with elected members of PCCs. There are some certainties that that officers will be elected, and that can be determined. It's the members at large of the PCCs that gives rise to the variation. It is nonetheless the case that if you compare it to deanery synods, there are many parishes that do not take up their number of permitted seats on a deanery synod, so that there is that vagary in practice there as well. But it is an issue.
I regret I don't have the facility to sign, but with regard to Deaf Anglicans Together, obviously it's open for any member of any church to stand for election to the Deanery Synod currently, and they would be eligible to be an elector under any of the systems that we have been talking about this morning. Clearly it has been possible for Deaf Anglicans Together to play a full role in the life of this synod, It does, in the end, I suppose, depend on how much local facilitation there is for deaf people to be able to participate in the life of whatever body it is that does the electing. Clearly, if one had universal suffrage or the Electoral College, the need for that facilitation would be rather less than if it involved being a member of another body. The question of whether there should be a special constituency for deaf Anglicans was considered in the last quinquennium, and it was decided that that was not appropriate, and there were a number of other constituencies for which people were making a case, but the general view was that that was not, on balance, the right way to go. Jason, my view is that justice should trump complexity. I mean, clearly there is a balance, and something that is impossibly complex as to be unworkable actually isn't just either. But my suggestion is that particularly the Electoral College system is not really very complex, and justice certainly wins there in my view, but Geoffrey may want to express a different view.
Well, my client may be instructing me to give a different view, but actually I think that, well, Synod must decide, but surely in the end, justice must always trump whatever complexity, and all the suggested possibilities have the complexities of one sort or another. But I think when we're talking about representation in the House of Laity, I think Synod really should consider justice must trump everything else.
So I'm minded to take just 3 more questions, lady there. And is there anyone standing from the northern province? No? Oh, where? I can't see anyone. Oh, right, up in the, come down and speak to us in Northern Province. And then Mr. Oldham.
Valerie Hallard, Carlisle 266. I'm a Deanery Synod elected rep for my PCC, which means I'm an ex officio member. And I imagine that means that there must be a number of Deanery Synod reps which would not be included in the electorate should we go for the PCC model, and I wanted to ask if that was the case.
Robert Shaw, 217 Sheffield. Having had the sad privilege to bury a number of my congregation since I've been in post, my question is, if we went to the Electoral College, what would we do when people maybe who had been elected died? Would that be causing lots more work for me to be organising by-elections after obviously being sad that somebody had died?
Mr. Oldham.
Gavin Oldham, Oxford 378. I'm intrigued by the final one on our sheet, which is all those entered on church electoral rolls. I'm fully aware of the reservations which have been expressed, but my question is this. This could be a major evangelical opportunity. If we were to raise the profile and talk about the Christian faith very visibly throughout the population, there could be 1 million electors here. I wonder if you could tell us what plans there would be for really getting the publicity out there and talking to the population what this was all about.
Thank you very much. Can we have a response to those 3 questions in conclusion?
As I understand it, Deanery Synod members, in the terms of what's being proposed here, count as elected members of the PCC. Because they are elected by the APCM just as the PCC members are. So I don't think there will be a problem of Deanery Synod members being excluded if we went for the PCC option. What do we do when people die? I suppose it would rather depend whether there was an election imminent. I mean, clearly, if you've had your APCM in the spring and a person sadly dies in June and there's a General Synod election in the autumn, then I suppose you probably would have to have a by-election. But otherwise, if there wasn't an election imminent, I imagine you'd simply leave it to the next APCM to fill the vacancy. So, in the great scheme of things, unless you are incredibly unfortunate, I don't think it's likely to be an onerous burden. Let's all pray for revival and to have an electoral roll of thousands, many, many thousands. I don't, however, myself think, Philip may have a different view, I don't myself think that giving a vote to electoral roll members will in itself bring people to Christ, but I may be wrong.
If only it would. I rather hope that electoral roll members have recognised the Lordship of Jesus Christ in their lives. But I would say to Gavin, you're right, there would be an opportunity there, and I would hope that with the digital team in Church House, we could use electoral registration as a means to elect in the General Synod to get some public and press interest.
Can I remind you that in front on your table you've got your voting paper. As I said earlier, it's a single transferable vote. You could, one against your first preference, two against your second preference, until you run out of preferences. And it should be deposited in the information desk outside in the box available. Meanwhile, can I thank on your behalf all those behind me who've worked so hard to bring this presentation to us. And as I heard that as we conclude this item, there was the divinely inspired sport mentioned yesterday, but the Saturday morning result of a different sport was not mentioned. In electoral terms, it was a draw, but in moral and probably converting terms, I think we could regard it as a small victory. That concludes this item, and we move on to item 19, item special agenda, legislative business, which you'll find on order paper 5.
Members of Synod, we have now reached the final approval stage for draft amending canon number 36, 37, and that members, you need the draft amending canon GS 2029B and GS 2029BB, and also the petitions for the Royal Assent and License GS 2029C and GS 2029CC. As required by Standing Order 102, I declare on behalf of the President, the Prosecutor of the Convocations, and the Chair and Vice Chair of the House of Laity that the requirements of Article 7 of the Constitution have been accomplished in respect of draft amending canon number 36. So I now call upon the Bishop of St. Albans to move item 5 or 7, that this canon be entitled amending canon number 36 be finally approved. The Bishop may speak for up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the Synod, please bear with me. I'll try to be as concise and precise as possible, but I do just need to rehearse the process of getting here and what we're doing today. Members will recall that what are now before the Synod as amending canons 36 and 37 were originally a single amending canon number 36. It was introduced to give effect to 2 resolutions, both the result of private members' motions that were passed by the Synod in the last quinquennium. The Revision Committee subsequently divided the original amending canon number 36 so that it now deals with just one of those resolutions, whilst the other is given effect by amending canon number 37. Now, the first of the Synod's resolutions concerned canon B8, which prescribes the form of vesture to be worn during services. The Synod asked for that canon to be amended so that the forms of vesture it prescribes should become optional rather than mandatory. Much of the desire for this was based on missiological considerations of how we relate to a fast-changing culture. Amending canon number 36 makes a number of amendments to canon B8 to achieve these objectives. Firstly, in the case of Holy Communion, the minister will not have to wear a surplice or alb with scarf or stole if the minister has ascertained, by consultation with the PCC, that adopting some other form of dress will be acceptable and will benefit the mission of the Church in that parish. Secondly, in the case of morning and evening prayer on Sundays, the amendment is slightly different. That is because Canon B8, as it stands, already provides some flexibility in terms of what may be worn at these services. Currently, the minister must normally wear a surplice or alb with a scarf or stole at morning or evening prayer on Sundays. That means he or she already has scope for not doing so on weekdays and occasionally on Sundays. Under the new provisions, the minister will be able, on a general basis, to adopt some form of dress at morning or evening prayer, some other form of dress at morning or evening prayer on Sundays. Again, the test for doing so will be that the minister has ascertained by consultation with the PCC that doing so will be acceptable and will benefit the mission of the Church in the parish. The requirement that the minister must have ascertained by consultation with the PCC that adopting some other form of dress will be acceptable was not contained in the amending canon in the form it took at the first consideration stage. That requirement was added by the Revision Committee so that due weight was given to the acceptability to the laity of any proposals to dispense with the wearing of vesture. At the same time, the Revision Committee also added a provision so that in the event of disagreement between the minister and the PCC, the minister must refer the matter to the bishop for directions. And then thirdly, amending canon number 36 also makes new provision in relation to the occasional offices. The usual position is that the minister may adopt a form of dress other than one of the traditional forms of vesture if that has been agreed with the persons concerned. That would involve a discussion with the parents or the candidate in the case of a baptism, with the couple in the case of a wedding, and with the family in the case of a funeral. However, where a baptism takes place during worship, for example during the parish Eucharist, the minister will not need to obtain the agreement of the persons concerned to dispense with the wearing of traditional vesture if that is the normal practice of the parish at the service in question. The amending canon inserts a new paragraph into canon B8 to ensure that where traditional forms of vesture are dispensed with, the form of dress adopted by the minister must nevertheless be suitable for a minister of the Church of England officiating at divine service. It's regrettable, I think, it's taken time to get to this stage. The Synod resolution calling for these changes was passed back in February 2014, but I also recognise the legislative process has enabled substantial improvement and refinement of the original proposals. I believe the result is one with which the whole breadth of the Church of England can embrace, and therefore I'm happy to move this this motion standing in my name.
Item 507 is open for debate, and may I remind members of Synod that under Standing Order 64, motions for the closure, the speech limit or next business are not in order in this debate. So the item is open for debate. James Dudley Smith, and followed by you, sir. Thank you.
James Dudley Smith, Bath and Wells, number 59. Chair, I spoke on this subject in February of this year. I've just got one thing to add. Back then I said I felt that the draft amending canon indicated a win for everybody, including those in my varied deanery of Yeovil, and that it was appropriate in our generally less formal culture, though it hardly represents a revolution. And my principal reasons for supporting the change is the need for flexibility in our mission to the nation. My view has not changed on any of those matters, but I do, as I say, have one thing to add. It is my prayer and hope, and in fact my expectation, that the permissions given by this amending canon will require clergy like me and others who robe to prepare ourselves to minister with yet further charity and consideration for those affected by our ministry. The PCC, the congregation, the people of the parish, the bishop, the parents of the child, the marrying couple, the bereaved family. There will be, under the prescribed conditions, a bit more choice for me, but it's a choice about how best to serve others. Part of 1 Corinthians 9 was quoted the other day, and in that chapter the Apostle also says, "Though I am free and belong to no one, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible." So there is a choice, and the choice the Apostle makes is to choose the good of others. And that's when he says, "I've become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some." He chooses for the good of others, and especially those currently outside of Christ's love and salvation. And so let us do the same. I think the term vesture through these debates may have seemed a little quaint to some of us. But it may nonetheless help us to recall that beautiful prayer which I hope we often sing. Let holy charity mine outward vesture be, and lowliness become mine inner clothing. So it is for the sake of charity to others, as well as for our mission to a diverse nation. I support this motion.
Andrew Atherstone, followed by the Archdeacon of London.
Andrew Atherstone, Oxford 184. Might I just clarify what the speech limit is? Thank you.
5 minutes, I'll tell you when I've reduced it. Should there be more speeches? You've got 5.
Synod, I support this amendment to Canon B8 because it's a permissive measure for an already permissive canon. Canon B8 has been on the statute book now for 53 years, but it was specifically designed to allow breadth, variety and local decision-making in the Church of England. You remember that there were hundreds of parishes around the country, heirs of the Tractarian revival, who wanted greater freedom in clerical dress for the sake of mission in their local areas. Technically, of course, their colourful dress code broke the law, but the Church Assembly and the Houses of Parliament agreed a new permissive canon to allow local clergy and PCCs to make local decisions about local mission. Let me quote from the second Church Estates Commissioner, Sir John Arbuthnot, introducing Canon B8 before the House of Commons in 1964. This is not a measure for change, he says. It is a measure to bring the law into line with established practice. It's not a mandatory measure, it is rather a permissive one. And in commending it to the House for approval, I would just add that one of the great strengths of the Church of England is its tolerance. And then he went on to admit, if given the choice of attending a service where the vestments were simple or where they were more ornate, I would prefer the simple service every time. But I do not feel that it's up to me, who prefer simplicity, to deny more colourful vestments to those who find them helpful in their worship. Well, you can read the full debate in Hansard. Canon B8, as it stands, is already a permissive canon, throwing its arms open to a wide variety of authentic ways to express Anglican ministry and mission. And therefore it's entirely appropriate today, after more than half a century, that we extend the range of permission. The revisions on the table are very modest. They don't undermine Canon B8 at all. In fact, they do precisely the opposite. They're entirely in keeping with its original purpose. When it comes to Anglican mission, one size does not fit all. We live in a wonderfully diverse nation, thousands of contrasting and vibrant cultural contexts up and down the land, and the people best equipped to decide on the most appropriate forms of mission in your parish are those who actually live and worship there, who understand your unique setting led by your PCC and clergy. So let's today grant local churches permission to make local choices for the sake of reaching local communities. We don't need identical carbon copies or cookie cutters imposed by central office. When no core doctrine is at stake, rigid uniformity in worship is a dangerous principle. It amounts to one half of the Church of England saying to the other half, we don't want it in our parishes, so you can't have it in yours. But Canon B8, as it stands, models a much better approach of permission for local choice when it comes to clerical clothing. So let's support the revisions, which simply increase that breadth of permission for an already permissive canon.
I can't see anybody else wanting to speak. Sir, come down. Please, following the Archdeacon of London. The Archdeacon of London is dressed in the way, not because there's a new vesture for speaking. It's just that today there was chaplains and cadet services in a meeting, including the Synodical Secretary for the Convocation of Canterbury. So that's why you're dressed like this, sir, in case people wondered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Luke Miller, 162 London. Thank you very much indeed for making the point. You will know, Synod, by now that I'm someone who quite enjoys dressing up in different ways. And at the beginning, when this amending canon was first brought forward, I had some concerns. But I think we are now in a much better place, and in a place where we can all joyfully accept the new permissions which are being given. I had concerns because I felt that there were moments perhaps when we might have found ourselves in a position where themed weddings might have suddenly imposed. I had stories of a priest who was asked to wear a purple stole at a wedding. Those of you that don't do coloured dressing up in church should know that that's the sort of thing worn at a funeral most of the time, because purple was the colour that the bridesmaids would be wearing. Had we found ourselves in a position where clergy might have come under that sort of pressure for ways that would have undermined mission and have led us not to the solemnity of divine worship, but into places of even deeper foolishness than sometimes some of us find ourselves anyway, that would have been a difficult thing. Some people have raised issues around safeguarding, which I don't think we need too much to worry about. There are many people in positions of authority in our churches who don't have a vesture. Church wardens would be an obvious example. I think we can say positively, and should do, that one of the positive reasons for forms of vesture is that they reduce, as do all forms of uniform, the individuality of the person who is wearing them, and allow us to focus not on the individual, but on the one whom we all attempt to proclaim. But we are now in a place where we can be able joyfully to accept these amending canons, and I hope very much that we can do so. And I would also say, returning to a naval theme, it would help me as an archdeacon occasionally not have to do the Nelson thing and not see what I'm looking at.
Canon Alistair McPhee, so I didn't recognize you from up there, but you're welcome. You, sir, from this height, you can't actually see people's faces properly. You come down, please. You'll be next. Thank you. 5 minutes still.
Thank you. Alistair McHaffey, 69 Blackburn. Chair, thank you for calling me. We've already emphasised and mentioned the informality that we now have in our society. When I was a child, I always called my parents' friends by Mr. and Mrs. surname or uncle or auntie Christian name, whereas today all my friends' children and grandchildren call me simply Alistair. My dad invariably wore a shirt and tie when he went out, even in his days off, a shirt and tie, and he still wears a shirt and tie. I tend to open neck collar and jeans. Years ago, Archbishops of Canterbury would wear sensible black shoes at General Synods. And I've noticed this weekend we've seen our Archbishop in a pair of blue trainers. So we've become, is he frowning or smiling? Aren't they?
No, they're walking shoes.
They're walking. Okay, I stand corrected. They're walking shoes. But whatever you call them, we've become far more informal in what we wear and how we address one another. And the same has happened in many of our churches over a number of decades. And all we're doing is simply reflecting the way that society has gone in terms of informality. And by voting for this item, the first thing it will do is give our church and our parishes, our clergy and our PCCs the option to be flexible enough to wear the right thing in the right context. For the last 14 years, it seemed right for me in my context not to wear robes at our worship services, but it's horses for courses. In my previous 2 parishes, I almost always wore robes. And if I were to be appointed to another parish where, for the sake of the gospel, it made more sense to wear robes, I would do so. So in passing this legislation, as we've already said, we're not imposing anything on anyone. We're not imposing anything on any church. All we're doing is permission giving. We're recognising that many hundreds of our churches have already dispensed with robes, and we are going to give them permission to continue with our blessing. We're also giving permission for clergy and churches to be flexible so that clergy and PCCs can decide the most appropriate thing to be worn in their particular missional context. This legislation seems both timely and appropriate, and I encourage you to vote in its favour.
Bill Bravner, followed by Professor Mark Chapman, please.
Thank you, Chair. Bill Bravner, Durham 104. I'm very pleased to hear that the person leading our church in its pilgrimage has his walking shoes sorted. That's a good idea. I want to support this motion, but I just want to say something that I think is very important, and it's on the level of humility. I've come across quite a number of occasions where families, particularly for pastoral offices and for things like confirmations, would dearly have loved the clergy officiating to have been robed, but the tradition of the parish hasn't been that, and therefore they haven't been robed. And the paragraph 6b of the motion, of the canon, talks about agreeing with the persons concerned. And I would just make a plea for clergy who prefer not to robe to be open to robing when it's actually best for the mission of the church, as much as I would plead that those of us who prefer to robe would be prepared to dispense with that if it was getting in the way. So it's just that two-way humility that I'd like to encourage, but I would firmly support this motion.
Mark Chapman, followed by Paul Ayers, please.
Mark Chapman, Oxford 187. I spoke in the very first debate we had on this canon, and I think one of the important things is to remember what a canon is for. and chiefly a canon is a point of last resort when people fall out with one another. Most of the time you don't need to enforce canons, and my argument at the very beginning was that there wasn't much point in having a canon that was completely unenforceable. One of the things I really welcome in this, and the various stages that have come to it, is that we now have a mechanism by which people can together decide on what is best for the mission of the church, the mission of that particular service, and come together to make that decision. And there is now a formal mechanism to go through, and if people don't go through that, then presumably the canon might be invoked if it needed to go any further. So I really welcome this, and I welcome the mechanism that makes it an enforceable canon. Thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Ayres, Leeds 130. I just want to inject a slight note of caution. We're told that this is not about prescription, but about making something optional. And whenever I hear that in relation to worship and liturgy and so on, I always want to ask the question, whose option are we talking about? It's said that the minister must consult the PCC and ascertain that this will be acceptable. And I just want to ask that question, acceptable to whom? I agree very much with the last speaker but one who urged us to have humility about those who are affected by it. I've always taken the view that if it says Church of England on the label, it ought to be Church of England in the bottle, and that parishioners have a right to expect Anglican worship in their parish churches. Now, this applies to far more than just vesture. It applies to everything about liturgical compliance, which, as a fairly new archdeacon, I'm discovering is something that I have to wrestle with. I think we just have to face the fact that sometimes one of the reasons that some parishioners don't go to church can be because of the people that do, and the way that they conduct matters. I'm just slightly concerned that this could be a recipe for a lot of pointless controversy and argument in PCCs, where the minister may have an undue dominance, and I am concerned about the rights of the laity. So I just wonder if those proposing this would like to say something about what assurance can be found that these concerns won't be realised. Thank you.
Rosie Harper, Oxford 190. I just wanted to comment on the fact that so far we've only heard from men and we've been talking about clergy frocks. Is this significant?
Well, an Orthodox friend, when we were on Odessa together, said, when men want to show they are more than men, they wear ladies' clothes. I see no one else standing. Bishop, will you please respond? You've got up to 5 minutes. I don't think you've needed, but...
Thank you very much, members of the Synod. I don't think I need 5 minutes because basically there's been such huge support. Generally, I thought it was helpful, the point that James Dudley Smith made about it's not about personal preference, but more about how we choose to serve and trying to think about the people to whom we're ministering. And I think that's a very helpful reminder. The point that was made earlier about by Paul Ayres about what the word acceptable, it's very difficult to define that. It seems to be something about being generally acceptable to people in the parish. But of course, generally in the parish. But if there is disagreement, what the canon says, it has to be referred to the bishop, who will, if necessary, consult and give some sort of guidance. Just with those very brief comments, I don't need to do, I think, anything more other than to thank members of the Synod for the various points that they've made.
Thank you very much, Bishop. Because the canon makes provision, as mentioned in section 1.1 of the Church of England Worship and Doctrine Measure, 1974, in order to be carried, the motion for final approval requires a majority in each house of not less than 2/3 of those present and voting. The question is that the canon entitled Amending Canon number 36 be finally approved. In accordance with Standing Order 37, I order a counted vote by houses.
I am now about to ring the bell to warn members that a counted vote is to take place. 2 minutes after it ceases, the vote will begin.
This is a counted vote by houses. Those in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3. A majority of not less than 2/3 of the members of each house present and voting is required.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period has ended.
They voted in the House of Bishops, 18 in favour, 3 Against? Recorded abstention? None. The voted in House of Clergy in favor 104, against 5, recorded abstention 4. In House of Laity in favor 116, against 8, recorded abstention 7. It's been carried in all three houses. So I now call upon the Bishop of St. Albans to move item 508, that the petition for Her Majesty's Royal Assent and License GS 2029C be adopted.
I do so move.
The Bishop has moved. Is there any debate? I see no one standing. This is a show of hands because it requires simply a simple majority. So those in favor, please show. Thank you. To the contrary, that's clearly carried. We now come to the final approval stage of amending canon number 37. As required by Standing Order 102, I declare on behalf of the Presidents, the Prolocutors of the Convocations, and the Chair and Vice Chair of the House of Laity that the requirements of Article 7 of the Constitution have been complied with in respect of drafting amending canon number 37. And I call upon the Bishop of St. Albans to move item 509, that the canon entitled amending canon number 37 be finally approved. The Bishop may speak for up to 10 minutes.
Thank you. Anyone who is resident in a parish or who dies in a parish has a legal right of burial in the churchyard unless it's been closed by order in council. That right has been extended by statute to all those whose names are on the electoral roll at the time of death. The minister with Cura Souls has a corresponding duty to officiate at a burial or cremation. Under the pre-Reformation canon laws, certain persons were refused Christian burial. That included those who took their own lives while of sound mind, the excommunicate, and the unbaptized. Those canonical provisions continued in force in England after the Reformation and remained in operation until the 19th century. The Burial Laws Amendment Act 1880 allowed a form of Christian service approved by the bishop, albeit not to the burial service itself, to be used at the burial of a person who had committed suicide whilst of sound mind. And in 1882, a further Act of Parliament made it lawful for the body of such a person to be buried in a churchyard. More recently, the Prayer Book, Further Provisions Measure 1968, relaxed some of the requirements as to the service to be used in such cases. Canon B38 in its current form reflects matters as they were left in 1968. It's the minister's duty to bury any deceased parishioners, including a person who's taken his own life while of sound mind, a person who's excommunicate, or a person who is unbaptized. But the law provides that instead of using the normal funeral service, the minister shall use at the burial such service as may be prescribed or approved by the ordinary. The traditional attitude towards the burial of suicides reflected the belief that all suicide was a grave sin. But public attitudes had changed markedly by the second half of the last century as understandings of mental health had developed. A significant report from the Church of England's Board for Social Responsibility, published in 1959, noted that the approach in society at large was now that, and I quote, "A person who attempts suicide must be in a state of mental distress and therefore needs special sympathy and understanding," end quotation. The report endorsed that shift of attitude. So common worship, pastoral services, now includes prayers after a suicide. And more generally, the strict requirements of Canon B38 now appear in practice to be honoured more in the breach than in the observance. Even where suicide is suspected or confirmed, many clergy will use the normal burial service with few, if any, modifications. So far as those who've not been baptised are concerned, common worship pastoral services includes a theological note on the funeral of a child dying near the time of its birth, which clearly assumes that in many cases a child whose funeral is taking place will not have been baptised. So the Church has already acknowledged circumstances in which the funeral service may be used for the unbaptised. In any case, it's not contemporary pastoral practice for clergy generally to inquire whether the deceased was baptised. So even though some 2/3 of infants born in the middle of the last century were baptised, it's highly likely that a significant proportion of the at least 3,300 funerals conducted each week by an Anglican minister using the normal funeral service are for those who were not baptised. There is clearly, therefore, some tension between, on one hand, canon law as expressed in B38, and on the other, the expectations about the use of funeral rites conveyed within contemporary Church of England liturgical provision and normal pastoral practice. Amending canon number 37 seeks to address that tension. It amends canon B38 so that there will no longer be a general rule against using the burial service for those who take their own life while of sound mind or who die unbaptised. The form of service in the prayer book or common worship will be available in the ordinary way. But there is a conscience clause for individual clergy. There may be cases, probably a very small number, where a minister would have a conscientious objection to using the usual form of service in two of the special cases which Canon B38 currently addresses. That could arise, for example, where it's known that the deceased was avowedly not a Christian, or where he or she had died as a result of assisted suicide. If the minister has a conscientious objection, she or he will have to notify the bishop and use an alternative form of service which the bishop has approved. The obsolete exception for those who die having been declared excommunicate has been removed altogether. With those comments and introductory comments laid out before you, I'm happy to move this motion before Synod.
Thank you, Bishop. The item 509 is open for debate. May I remind members that under Standing Order 64, motion for the closure, the speech limit on next business are not in order in this debate. However, at the beginning of this debate, I impose a speech limit of 3 minutes. Yes, sir. Thank you. Any more? Anybody wants to speak, please? Debbie, please. So.
Gary Jenkins, Southwark 223. I think this is a wise and compassionate reform. When a close member of our family took his own life, what I really discovered at that time was that we needed the funeral. The family needed the funeral. The family was for the people left behind. It's made me feel increasingly that funerals, in fact, are always more for the living than the dead. In the case for suicide, I think families need the comfort of the Church's funeral ministry, possibly more than in any other case. So I warmly support this change. Thank you.
Debbie Buggs, London.
Hold on. Is there anybody else wanting? I think there's somebody standing earlier on there. Okay. Will you please calm down? Thank you very much. Sorry.
Debbie Buggs, London 353. I warmly support this motion, but I want to say why I support it, which is different from why the Bishop has suggested we support it. He suggested that the Church is moving towards a more compassionate basis because we felt the pressure of society. I disagree with that. I support this motion because I think we're removing restrictions that were never found in the Bible in the first place. I support the motion.
Priscilla White, and you, thank you very much. Thank you.
Priscilla White, Birmingham 65. I want to support the motion. I want to encourage people to be particularly compassionate, even in those cases where the person has been of sound mind and has taken a decision to end their life. It is possible to argue that anyone who wants to end their own life isn't of sound mind, but that isn't always true. Sometimes people do this for what they believe to be very sound and right reasons, and even if we profoundly disagree with what they have done, they still deserve our compassion, our care, our love, and the funeral service that they could have. Thank you. I support the motion.
Wendy Coombe, Hereford 320. Since we started debating this, we have also had a suicide death in our family. And I cannot tell you how my family felt to have the love and care shown to us, because there was no suggestion during the service that my brother had done anything that deserved condemnation. And there were 600 people who attended his funeral. And for us to have been able to share the care of the church with those people, and to have members of my family who were not Christians but actually came to us afterwards and said how much they had valued it. I didn't expect to speak today, and I wasn't sure if I could speak without getting upset, but please support this motion. I can't tell you what it does in terms of our mission and the love and care we show to our communities. Thank you.
David Lemming, followed by you. Now 2 minutes each, please. 2 minutes.
David Lemming, 399 St David's Lips. I too have experienced a suicide in the family. My father's brother committed suicide some 40 years ago. I don't remember much about the funeral. I think it was held at a crematorium down in Wiltshire. But what I want to say particularly is, having attended the Life Events workshop the other day, to see the opportunities for evangelism that there are in the life events, and to see the statistics of the numbers of people who attend funerals and the contact that we have. This is an opportunity to show Christ's love to people, whatever the circumstances of the death of the person whose funeral is being conducted.
Thank you. Carrie Myers, got 2 minutes. Anybody else? The floor is yours.
Carrie Myers, Southwark 415. Just want to add my support to the motion to the many others who have spoken from personal experience. When we debated this previously, another younger member of Synod talked about its particular pertinence for younger people. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death for young people in this country. When I was at university, we lost a friend to suicide. He'd had mental health issues, including alcohol addiction, for quite a long time. And the trauma for the entire college community in responding to that death was huge. And I can't imagine any clergy person at that point interrogating his family as to whether they believed he was of sound mind, or restricting the options for his funeral if they thought that he might have been. So I just want to add my weight of support for this motion, for those who have committed suicide, and also for those of us who are involved in pastoral care for those who attempt suicide and recover from that, that the Church sends a message of pastoral care, that this is not a grave sin, but very often tied up with mental health issues. I support this. Thank you.
I see no one else standing. Bishop, you got up to 2 minutes still. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. In the light of the fact that all 6 speakers were so supportive of everything in this, I don't think I need to respond individually other than to say thank you very much for your moving personal stories, which, if you like, put a human face on the work that we're doing today.
Thank you, Bishop. Because the canon makes provision, as mentioned in Section 1.1 of the Church of England Worship and Doctrine Measure 1974, in order to be carried, the motion for final approval requires a majority in each house of not less than 2/3 of those present and voting. So the question is that the canon entitled Amending Canon number 37 be finally approved. And in accordance with Standing Order 37, I order a counted vote by houses.
I'm now about to ring the bell. 2 minutes after it ceases, the counted vote will begin.
This is a counted vote by houses. Those in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3. A majority of not less than 2/3 of the members of each house present and voting is required.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. Fifteen seconds. The voting period is now ended.
They voted in the House of Bishops in favour 21, against nil, recorded abstention nil. They voted in the House of Clergy in favour 125, against nil, recorded abstention 1. They voted in the House of Laity in favour 132, against 1, recorded abstention nil. So the measure, the amending canon has been passed in all three houses. Now I call upon the Bishop of St. Albans to move item 510, that the petition for Her Majesty's Royal Assent and License GS 2029CC be adopted.
I do so move.
Is there any debate? Since this is required simply by a simple majority, those in favour, please show. Thank you. To the contrary, that is clearly carried. That concludes the... The petition will be accordingly presented to Her Majesty the Queen. That concludes the items of business relating to amending canon number 36 and 37. And since we have still a little bit of time before lunch, I suggest that item 6 on the Church Commissioner's annual report will be taken before we rise for lunch. Thank you very much.
Okay, members of Synod, we are looking at item 6, the annual report of the Church Commissioners. We've just got 12 or 13 minutes before lunch, so I call upon the Bishop of Manchester, Deputy Chair of the Church Commissioners, to make his presentation.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the Business Committee for finding this small slot within the agenda for us. I will speak very briefly and hope that will give the opportunity, Chairman, for a couple of questions. By the end of 2016, the fund was worth some £7.9 billion. In reporting that figure, I would want to pay tribute to the Assets Committee members, our staff, our various professional advisors, and of course our recently retired First Church Estates Commissioner, Sir Andreas Whittam-Smith. He led for 15 years with wisdom, courage and diligence. On his watch, the fund grew from £3.5 billion to £7.9 after the expenditure of £3 billion in support of the mission and ministry of the Church. We're already missing him enormously, but are delighted with the announcement from Downing Street that Loretta Minghella, currently CEO of Christian Aid, will succeed Sir Andreas in November. We look forward very much to working with her. Our total return last year was 17.1%, but I should remind Synod of Sir Andreas's warning that we shouldn't expect future returns to be at current levels, given a whole range of political and economic uncertainties. We've achieved these results operating within our ethical investment framework. It's a welcome and necessary part of our work for an institution like the Church. We can and should be ethical, but more than this, as a large investor, we, sometimes in league with other investors, are able to speak with an influential voice. We prefer engagement to disinvestment, though we have disinvested where companies have failed to respond to engagement. We recently had a particular success persuading ExxonMobil shareholders to urge the company to improve its disclosure of the impact of its climate change policies. We got a 62% shareholder vote. I'd also want to make special mention of our timber portfolio. We are, I think, the largest owner of private commercial forestry in the UK. But the real bottom line is this, that investment only matters because it translates into money that can be made available to support the Church's mission. Money is the means and not the end. We've made available strategic development funding via the Archbishop's Council. Already £15 million has been awarded between 2014 and 2016, supporting 24 projects in 20 dioceses. And crucially, we, with the Council, have changed the way we distribute funds. It's now much more intentionally focused on need and on opportunities for growth. It's overseen by a new strategic investment board. No longer formulaic, we are now investing strategically in the reversal of decline, in building on growth, in mutual learning and equipping the Church for the future. All of this supports the ongoing renewal and reform agenda which Synod has itself repeatedly supported and endorsed. I do need to say these excellent investment returns don't mean there's lots more cash available to distribute. First and foremost, we must continue to meet our pension obligations. That was £122 million last year. The actuaries then judge how much money can be made available sustainably to support other purposes. It's done in a smooth way, so the Church doesn't feel bumps in the road if we have a few bad years, but neither does a windfall appear if we have a few good years. We do other things besides asset management, of course, and distribution. There isn't time this morning to talk about the work of the Mission and Pastoral Committees, bishoprics and cathedrals, and church buildings, but they are also a vital part of the mission and ministry of the Church. I commend the Commissioner's annual report to Synod.
Members of Synod, also like to welcome to the stage Andrew Brown, Matt Chamberlain and Ian Theodorson from the Church Commissioners, who may answer any of the questions that people have got. So Business Committee have said that there will be a time for questions. We haven't got very long. If you'd like to ask a question, please stand. Nigel Bacon and Penny Allen, I think.
Nigel Bacon, Lincoln 341. Thank you for calling me. As the Bishop mentioned, an important call on the Church Commissioners' finances is providing for clergy pensions. But this is a historical provision, and sadly all good things must come to an end, and as people die, the call on the pension fund will, as I understand it, reduce. I'm interested in knowing what plans, if any, the Church Commissioners have for applying the funds released, and actually what that rate of release of funds is likely to be over, say, the next 10 years. Thank you.
Okay, well, can we have an answer to that question? And then Priscilla White's question.
Thank you, Mr. Bacon, for your question. The money that is going on pensions is kind of fully accounted for. The actuaries take all into account. It isn't the case that when we stop spending that money, and it will take many years for that to dwindle down to nothing, because people do have a habit of living a decent long time. That doesn't then create extra funds that we can distribute. That is already taken into account. We are a long-term investment body, and we've already manage that into the system. Currently, it's about, I think, about 25% or so of the total assets of the Church Commissioners is allocated towards the historic pension liability that we have. That figure will continue to come down, but that doesn't actually create more money to release, because that's already been taken full account of.
Priscilla White, Birmingham 65. So my question may be very similar. I'm not quite sure. I mean, the huge burden on dioceses, and particularly poor dioceses, of 39% of stipend to address the diocesan part of the pensions deficit is crippling. Is there any way that the Church Commissioners can help?
Thank you, Priscilla White, for that question too. In theory, I suppose the Commissioners could seek powers to spend some money to defray other costs of clergy pensions, but that that is robbing Peter to pay Paul. If we did use money on that, the money wouldn't be available for other things. It wouldn't create extra resource, and inevitably, given the way in which commissioners' funds are steered towards the areas of greatest need and the particular priorities for growth, that's what would be hit. And so it would be probably robbing the poorest more than it will be robbing the wealthiest. It will be regressive, I think, rather than progressive if we were to do that. But thank you.
Sue Slater, 344 Lincoln. I was interested in your report, which said that you voted against chairs of nomination committees in instances when female representation was below 25% of the board. I wonder why you choose that percentage and not 50%, and I wonder how you justify that, either of those percentages, when the church commissioners themselves are predominantly male. And before you say that most of the people who get onto church commissioners are there because they're outside your control, I mean they're nominated by outside bodies or they're ex officio, what are you proposing to do to change that?
Well, to some extent, you've taken some of the words out of my mouth there. The fact is, members of Synod, it's people like you who elect the people who you want to serve on bodies like the Church Commissioners. Clearly, I know there was a very strong lead from the Archbishop of Canterbury in particular, to ensure that bodies in this church that have leadership roles, that they better reflect the range and diversity and variety of the makeup of the Church of England as it is. Where there is the opportunity to do that, then we are not shy in taking that opportunity. But yes, these are matters that substantially lie outside of our control. In terms of boards, in a sense, any figure is arbitrary. Why 25%? Why 50%? I think we have to, in terms of our engagement, in terms of our voting, we're looking at what is realistically achievable, at where we can exert influence through our engagement, and creating targets that are demanding for the companies with whom we invest, but are not so far beyond what is achievable in the foreseeable future as to become meaningless. So the figures that are picked are to be stretching, but not overstretching.
Synod, we have time for one more question.
I think it seems appropriate that somebody on behalf of the Synod, Keith Gordon, Liverpool 345, should express our deep congratulations and appreciation to the Church Commissioners for what they have achieved over this last year on behalf of the Church and its mission. Congratulations and our grateful thanks.
That wasn't a question, so that's out of order, but the sentiments are well made.
I will see that is reported to the staff and the Board of Governors and our professional advisors and colleagues. Thank you very much.
So thank you to the Bishop of Manchester for that presentation and that short opportunity to questions. It's now lunch and we will come back at 2:30 this afternoon. Thank you very much.